What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the DX Gamer Show. My name is Mike, aka Operation DX, and welcome to episode number 32, our homecoming mission episode, where we have in fact created a successful space program. Made a lot of money. We pretty much have all the science we need to finish out the tech tree, which we'll probably do later on in this episode. So I kind of deemed this the homecoming special episode of the series. This is probably where I would probably send off the series, but we'll do one or two more missions because I know it'll make some of you guys happy. Well, I hope you guys don't mind, but this is actually going to be a little bit longer of an episode. Like I said, I consider this a homecoming special episode, and there's still a lot of stuff to zip up. And I want to go ahead and get all of this stuff to the point where I've played up to, which there's a lot of stuff that needs to get done. So, as I've expressed in the previous episode, we need to fly the goddess back to Kerbin, get ourselves into a nice, stable orbit, and then we're going to launch up the replacement miner for the vehicle, and then I can go ahead and get this vehicle pretty much back to the way it was. Right now, if I were to take the miner that's connected to the center docking port and put it on one of the side docking port, the craft would be severely unbalanced and it'd be very, very challenging to fly. SAS would have a hard time keeping it locked down. So that's why I decided to go ahead and just keep it right in the middle docking port, and then I'll connect it to the other one where it's supposed to be once I get the other craft launched and docked up. Now that I have some more advanced technologies, I did in fact redesign the launch vehicle to make it much more simplified, which of course is always better on the frame rates. Although launching one of those mining craft up into orbit isn't going to be too rough. It's when you get in the vicinity of the actual goddess ship. So here is one of those classic things that you run into with the LVN engine, especially the fact that my craft is overweight with oxidizer, is sometimes you have to not do your full burn and then like do a full loop around your orbit and then do the burn again. Sometimes several times, because the LVNs aren't all that strong. Even though we do have 8 on them, this craft weighs a lot. Alright, so it looks like we have to do a minor plane change. I just want to put us on a nice and clean equatorial orbit. That way it makes it easier for the vehicle that launches up into orbit to get connected. And I've been not doing the brute force thing for the last couple of dockings. I've been kind of doing the standard lock on target and then find the best maneuver. It is much more efficient doing it that way, of course. It's just sometimes, you know, I just run out of patience and I just want to brute force it. Just get it done, get it zipped up and wrapped up, and yeah, instead of just waiting for that maneuver node. But it essentially kind of ends up working out to be the same amount of time. Alright, so stable orbit around Kerbin. The mission is almost completed. Alright, so here it is. Got a fairing on there. Hope that makes you guys, some of you guys happy. You're like upset that I wasn't using fairings on some of my craft, and how you just like to see them pop off of craft. Yeah, I agree. It's pretty cool, I guess, right? Now, I don't know what happens with all those parts that break off there. I assume that they're immediately terminated and they're not tracked afterwards. Not like some other parts, like your rocket parts that you break off. I did, in fact, put parachutes on my SRBs. I don't know if that's going to save them, to be honest. But there they go. They are out of gas. They kind of bumped into each other. You also notice that I forgot to save my launch order, and I had to do a little bit of rearranging there on the left side. You know, sometimes the staging, like launch order. Yeah, I had to rearrange the staging a little bit. Because if I had hit the space bar with that current configuration, I would have broke the spacecraft. It would have not worked. So after this main engine burns out, I want to go ahead and hit the space bar and just watch everything go flying and stuff. So that's cool. Now, I'm intentionally going to underburn this engine. This engine actually can get me up into orbit, into stable orbit, no problem whatsoever. So the plan here is I'm going to create a maneuver node, and once I get within about 100 meters per second, I'm just going to go ahead and break off the shell, and that should leave this in a decaying orbit, and I won't have to worry about more space junk being left behind. So there we go. Not quite finishing off the maneuver node, firing up the replacement mining craft, and off we go. Now, what I should have done with this replacement mining craft is I should have put one of those more fancy probe cores on there. I did put that on for the cap, but if you just noticed, I just kind of like flung it off, and now we're in like standard mode where we don't get all those fancy autopilot settings and stuff. So I've come to become accustomed to those fancy autopilot settings. I just wish that they didn't overcompensate. I find myself doing that whole kind of like, I don't know if it's not really cheaty, but what you do is you let it get to almost where it's going to hit where you want it, and then you hit the speed up time, and it just stops, right? Because the physics calculations stop. I was doing that a lot here towards the end, because it just gets too annoying when the new maneuver just overcompensates. It's a computer system. It should never, ever, 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 ever do that. All right. So here we are. I'm trying to let the ship get caught up with me. I'm setting up my maneuver node to get an encounter as close as possible. And then I guess I will brute force the rest of this. And, you know, a lot of these later episodes in the series, I do apologize. They've all been very, very sped up. But it's kind of essential, especially, I mean, the Joule thing it's brutal. You imagine how many 15-minute episodes that would have been? It would have been too many. No one would be watching this series anymore. Because it's like, oh, okay, with the next Joule mission? Oh, God, not again with the Joule mission. Yeah, so can't do that to you guys. Absolutely not. All right, so making my final maneuvers here. I got myself, I think, within 7-8 meters, and from this point, I have to brute force it. No problem. I got to watch it, though. Sometimes I get a little too happy with that time acceleration button, but this docking is one of the easier dockings that has to be done throughout most of the spacecraft that I've designed. This one's easy to get orientation figured out. And, you know, if it's the wrong setting, because you got the free cam and the orbital cam, and I switch usually between the two, and one of the two is usually spot on for what I need. All right, so making our final approach here, and I'm going to go ahead and close my solar panels as usual. Once I get docked up, I definitely won't need that because this thing has a metric ton of power available with those large solar panels. But of course, like every freaking docking that I've done recently has been on the dark side of the planet. The one we did in Minmus and the one we're doing here, it's all on the dark side. I favor being on the light side, but you know what? We have tons of lighting on all these ships, and that is exactly why I designed these things this way, so you could see everything. In later craft, like, I intentionally made sure that there were lights on all the docking ports, so you could see after that whole like super dark docking that I did, remember, back in the series a little bit. There was no more of that. I was done with that. So no matter where I am, light side, dark side, I can dock without too much problem. Now, we did actually fly Bill up for this mission, so I have to transfer Bill from that ship over to the main goddess cockpit. But we have plenty of room for him. He can hang out, you know, kind of reminisce, talk about, you know, what Kerbal sports games these guys missed while they're on their, you know, 16-year, 14-year mission to Joule. And poor Jeb, he can talk about all the fuel runs and stuff he found out about Minmus. So, yeah. And then the docking that's coming up with the SSTO is actually going to be fairly challenging because both of these craft are really freaking heavy. All right, so back at the launch center, and here we are. And this is a craft that I gave a sneak peek of in the KSP Extra video that I was talking about. I do have that small one, and it behaves much, much better than this one. This is a 101-ton craft. It is an absolute beast. I didn't realize before I actually created this craft, you could create flaps. And this craft needs it. It needs it because it's so heavy of a craft. So the goal here is to just get this thing up to about 8,000 meters. And then I start burning my LVNs and just push on through. This is a brute force up into space kind of thing here. Currently, there are things going on in this craft that you can't see. So this craft does, in fact, have a ISRU unit with a full ore tank inside. It is running to generate liquid fuel. That's why you're probably noticing that like fuel is not being drained. And at this point, the ISR unit is kind of keeping up with the burn. Now later it can't keep up because once those high performance engines start hitting their stride in the upper atmosphere and they get higher thrust, it just starts cooking through the fuel. And then that's when we turn on our LVNs. And then we run the engines until we hit about 22,000 feet. We close our air intakes and the turbojet engines. And then from that point on, we use the aero spikes on the rear wing to finish off the maneuver. So yeah, I pretty much what happens here, it's really a weird setting. There's no change in maneuver here. So what I mean by that is once I hit 8,000 meters, I put this thing on a 10-degree angle and I don't touch it again. I leave the SAS on and I just let it naturally climb up the nav ball. And just that's how it works. It's weird. It's like you brute force it. It's not like my other SSTO to where I hit like 10,000, I get as high as the speed as I can, and I tilt back and I make sure that I'm not pulling too many G's to actually rip the craft apart. Now, this craft is so very, very unstable because of its weight. It is very easy to lose control. This thing is hard to get up. It is hard to get down, and that kind of makes part of the fun. When we do the maneuver to land this thing back down, it is so unconventional. You guys are just gonna be like, what is he doing? Yeah, it's interesting. Getting ahead of myself as usual. All right, so yep, just burning through here. So got the LVNs on. We're still pushing up 17,000 meters. Have not touched a thing. Just letting it go. It does pretty well heat-wise, considering I have the 4 LVNs in the back. I do have some heat dissipation modules, but they are the deployable ones, and I can't open that up until I leave the atmosphere. I also have 2 large solar panels. I have 2 fuel cells, large fuel cells inside that can generate the energy to keep the ISR unit up while it is down in orbit. So yeah, that's important. And here we go. We're starting to get some heat indicators. And what I like to do here is watch the oxidizer. And what I want to do is leave a tiny little bit of oxidizer left over for the fuel cells, just until I can reach a stable orbit, because I want to keep the ISR unit running the entire time. All right, so there we go. Cut the aerospikes. I'm completely on the LVNs at this point, and now I can change the attitude. So right now, it's important to me to gain as much speed as I possibly can get so that I don't start dipping back down into the atmosphere, which is easy to do with an SSTO. You can like totally lose it. But this thing has moved beyond that part to where the LVNs is pushing it forward in sufficient velocity to allow me to get into a stable orbit. I'm just nearly there. And there it is pretty much. All right, so that's not a stable orbit. So I will have to do 1 burn to stabilize my orbit, and then we'll link up with the goddess. Yep, so got a little heat indication, and that is to be expected after, you know, the harsh like approach. Now, This thing is really, really, really scary bringing it back down. It just the slightest, teeny tiniest wrong move will ruin this craft. It'll spin out of control, break apart. It's so brutal. It is so brutal. So I had to do a lot of testing with this thing. I've got it down though. I've got it down. I've got the landing system down, and I've got the takeoff down. So I could do it every time now. But it's just those initial phases. That's the stuff I was talking about in the previous episode that I didn't show. That, I mean, maybe you guys would like to see that, but I broke this thing apart a lot. All right, so I kind of spared you guys a little bit because I had a really tight orbit, and I sped that up, and sometimes the camera just like jiggles around for like too much. So that was a hard cut right there. So we are in proximity of the goddess, and we are simply lining up on that centralized docking port that the old mining ship was connected to. Now, this thing does not have a ton of RCS power. Originally, I was going to put those RCS modules that consume oxidizer and liquid fuel, which are a little more powerful. I think they give you like 20 thrust. Probably would be better for something like this, or maybe just a couple more RCS units, but pretty much just have a standard regiment. So I got, 4 blocks, 2 in the top, 2 in the bottom, and then I've got 4 of the unidirectional, 2 on the top, 2 in the bottom, and that's how I set this up. So it is a little bit jiggly, as you can see, when I'm moving it around. So there's a little bit of a balance mismatch, but I couldn't help it because the center of mass on this craft isn't in a really good position. So I just had to put the RCS forward and back and just guess. I could have kind of offset them to try to fix that issue, but it's not as bad as some of those other craft that I've built in the past where they just jiggly. So see here right now, it's just, it's wobbling back and forth. It doesn't quite know what's going on. I think it's just like an SAS computer issue. If I took direct control, I could probably stop it from doing this. But this is actually really sped up. This is sped up 300%. And I really take my time with this docking because, it's just really hard to get this thing maneuvering. It does not maneuver fast with the RCS. It takes a little while, which is just as well because it gives you that extra time to really get lined up, to really figure things out. Yeah, so you can see that sometimes I'm hitting the wrong keys. So like I accidentally hit the map key and all that stuff. But I thought it was a really cool view to go in the cockpit. It'd be cool if there was some sort of indicator in the cockpit that like lets you line up with a docking port, that kind of thing. I also brought up the docking port indicator just to take a look at it to see if there's any changes in there that would make the docking any easier. But we have tons and tons of lights here. But yeah, I just thought I kept going back to the IVA view because I thought it was fantastic looking. It was really cool. Just kind of, seeing what it looked like. I made a mistake there, but it looks worse than it is because, again, the video sped up. So this was all happening really, really slowly. So I just needed to realign and then go in for another push. Basically, what happened was I wasn't paying attention to my vertical velocity, and I kind of dipped below the docking port too quickly. And here we go, mating up. This is almost going to be a perfect mate. Well, it's not quite, I guess. I haven't had a lot of perfect dockings in this series where they just dock up real quick, but that wasn't actually too bad. That was pretty good considering his craft. All right, so here I go, transferring my Kerbals on board this beast of a SSTO. That module is ridiculous. It holds like 14 Kerbals, and I believe that this is a 5 Kerbal cockpit, so there is absolutely plenty of room aboard this ship for all the Kerbals that were out here. In fact, I could have had a ton more. Ooh, is that Valentina? I'm not sure. Who is that? Who is that? Oh, no, it's not. All right, just seeing who we have up in the cockpit there. Want to make sure Jeb's up in the cockpit. But, of course, we have one of the advanced probe cores on the front of this craft, which make it easier to fly because I love all those autopilot features. Can't say it enough. And now we just need to do a couple orbits around Kerbin because I want to land in the daylight. All right, so it is on right now. Prepping to do my landing. This is a very, very scary thing to do in this thing. You're about to be like, WTF, Operation DX, what are you doing? So normally I think you do like a 30-degree angle with an SSTO to kind of burn off some of that speed, and you want to kind of maintain that 30-degree angle. The problem is when this thing really starts catching the atmosphere. If you don't have the craft locked down and facing in a forward direction, it is game over because you've lost control of the craft. The craft will essentially flip around, turn backwards, and it will start spinning out of control until it hits that critical G limit and it will break apart. It happens every single time. So I had to come up with a completely unconventional way to get this thing back into the atmosphere and in a stable configuration once it finishes its travel through at such a high velocity. So this looks like more than 30 degrees, doesn't it? I'm essentially pitching this thing all the way back to 90 degrees. And what I want to do here is I'm going to be using my thrusters to keep myself at a certain altitude to bleed off as much speed as I possibly can. There's a point where this thing gets in the thickest, like I said, the thicker atmosphere, and it becomes absolutely uncontrollable. And that is usually in the right at the top of the blue part, the middle one. The light blue one, you're usually good to go. If you don't have control by then, you're hosed anyways. So, and I'm doing everything I can. You'll notice I'm using my RCS thrusters to help slow me down. I'm using the atmosphere. I'm firing up the aero spikes very sparingly. I'm trying to save up that oxidizer. But I'm just trying to keep my craft in a certain altitude and a certain speed to keep it as slow as possible. And this saves the craft from overheating. So if I were to say just let the craft head in, prograde, the craft is way too heavy. So what happens is when you get down to the lower part of the atmosphere, if you don't blow up, which is like what happens 99% of the time, if you manage to like slow down enough to where you make it into the atmosphere, it's impossible to pull the craft out of the dive. Because once you start to pull the craft out of the dive, the G load goes up too high and the craft breaks apart. So yeah, it requires a just completely unconventional way to do this. It is fun. It took me a while to figure this out. I haven't been a big SSTO person in Kerbal Space Program. And with the new aerodynamics model, it makes it that much harder. The flaps don't work properly. The flaps go up and not down, because normally flaps on real airplanes, they go down to generate more lift. And so, when you see the flaps on the wings go up, that's wrong. I also have two wings in the front of the craft, the canards. Now, you would think that maybe I'm abusing control surfaces, but I'm not at all. Those don't actually control the airplane whatsoever, because I hate that jiggly gyrating thing that happens when you have control surfaces in the front. It always wobbles back and forth when you turn the SAS on. No, all those do is they act as flaps, just like the flaps on the wings. So I hit a key and they go up, and they hit a key, they go back down, that kind of thing. It gives the craft more lift. And I will have to use that, especially on approach. That's why this craft is able to take off at 80 meters per second. If I didn't have that, it wouldn't be able to get off the runway until probably about 120 meters per second. But it can fly pretty decently. All right, so from this point, we do have control of the craft, but it's still not a cakewalk. This craft, you'd just be surprised like how easy this craft can get away from you. If I turn too hard to the left, if I turn too hard to the right, we'll lose the craft. So I gotta take really gentle turns to line up to the runway. And then once I get near the runway, I probably want to keep this thing at somewhere around 100 meters per second. And then right at the end, I can flare, slow it down to 80, and we should be good to go. So yeah, just trying to be really gentle with my turns here. This craft has a tendency to want to like wobble back and forth a little bit. As you see, like when I start turning it, it sometimes wobble. I don't know what's going on with the flaps, but sometimes they like just shift up and shift down for a split second. I think that's what causes it to wobble, and I don't know why they do that. I think that's just a bug. So yeah, it's kind of hard to see where exactly the runway lines up. We of course know it's 090. Can kind of see where the runway is in front of us, but lately I haven't been doing the best landings. But especially with craft like this is a really, really big craft compared to the stuff that I typically fly. I mean, this thing is far, far bigger than the other plane that I thought was pretty big that I built earlier on in the series. That was a VTOL. Yeah, much bigger than that. And that plane was much more stable and safer to fly. This thing, yeah, like I said, it'll lose control in a split second. You got to keep it really close to that prograde indicator, or man oh man, you are in for a ride. If you can save this craft, you are one lucky pilot, because I haven't been able to save it once it loses control. It's absurd. All right. I'm kind of glad I placed that flag down with Jeb. It kind of gives me a good indication. I was kind of thinking about doing like a little row of flags along this continent to kind of give you like a nice long approach, especially for a craft like this. It's not important for the smaller craft, but for something like this, it's critically important because it takes a lot of like tweaking and changing. Like this is really just like you have to do a lot of changes. It looks like we're lined up perfectly, and then the runway slips to the left and to the right. Again, it kind of makes me wish that there was some sort of big plane ILS landing system in Kerbal Space Program. That way you could get yourself lined up. But pretty much no, you're flying like VFR essentially in a flight sim. You've got to control every element. And you can't even consider having SAS locked on as an autopilot because all it does is keep you in a direction and actually kind of hurts you more than it helps you in some cases. All right, so doing my best to try to put this thing on target. As you can see, this last part, I'm just really struggling to keep this thing on target. All right, back into normal time, doing my flare. Not too bad of a touchdown, a little bit of a skip. That of course, worries me with a craft that weighs as much as this thing does. It essentially has a full fuel load because of the fact that it's constantly generating fuel. Now, I was starting to get these little puffs of smoke out of the back of the plane, and I didn't know what was going on there. It seemed like the engines were like puffing out on me or something. There was no damage. It's just, it looked like parts were getting damaged. It was fairly odd. Anyways, down safe and sound with all the Kerbals that were in orbit in different missions. So some of these guys are going to get a butt ton of experience. All right, so pretty much got almost the full value of the craft back. And I think every single Kerbal here got experience. They were all on various missions doing various things. Even Bill got some experience, and he hasn't done very much flying at all. He really just did that one mission, so we got the min-miss experience, I think. But yep, I think I maxed out a couple of Kerbals on that one. All right, so just wrapping things up, I got the 3550 experience or science long ago, but I figured I'd wait till after I do the homecoming thing and wrap things up there. So that pretty much does it for this one, guys. Hope you liked it. Have a great day and take care.